welcome to this Europe Project Spotlight session as part of our Breakbulk Europe Connect 21 World Project Expo series. We're delighted to have you all here joining us today on the days where we should have been together at Breakbulk Europe in Bremen, and hope you're enjoying connecting, networking and learning from peers, albeit virtually, for this year. Before we get started, I would just quickly like to go over a couple of housekeeping points for this session. Firstly, this webinar will be available on demand after the session, as I know this is one of our most frequently asked questions. And if you do have any questions for our speaker during the session, please ask them in the Q&A tab on your right-hand side, and we'll share these with the speaker after the session and publish the responses in our Breakbulk One newsletter over the coming weeks. I'll shortly be handing over to our speaker for today, Nekkhil Misra, who is the Director for Europe, Middle East, Africa and Russia at Independent Project Analysis. Before that, I would like to say a big thank you to our sponsor for this session, Navis. We'll now play a short video from Navis before getting started with the session.
Hi, I'm Shane Holdsworth, Implementation Manager here at Navis New Zealand. We're focused on the design and delivery of the world's leading cargo terminal operating systems for our customers. General cargo terminals are not container terminals, and the processes used to handle general cargo and bulk are significantly more complex than handling TEUs. Here at Navis, we understand the complexities and subtleties of the mixed cargo space. Every terminal is different, with processes being driven by a myriad of commodities being handled. The team behind Master Terminal by Navis have built our expertise over the past 25 years by working with our customers in the mixed cargo space. Our team in New Zealand is focused on one thing: evolving the product to meet the growing and ever-changing needs of the mixed cargo terminal market. Beyond our General Cargo Centre of Excellence, we offer you professional services and training with access to a large library of resources, so your business continually gets the best out of Master Terminal. We understand the general cargo market and the dynamics of implementing a new terminal operating system, and will work collaboratively with you to install Master Terminal quickly and efficiently.
Today's presentation is going to be talking about trends in capital projects. I hope you find this information useful and this presentation helpful. So first of all, just confidentiality. There's some data in here that is IPAs data. What we ask is, if you share this information, you at least attribute it to ourselves. There is some information here which is gathered from public sources, and that you should be able to share freely. In terms of the outline for this presentation, it is as shown on the screen in front of you. General introduction to IPA. I just want you to know who we are and where some of our information is coming from. I'm then going to do a section of what I call is what's in the news. So just gathering news articles over the last couple of months and just showing you snippets so you can understand, or we can all look and see what the macro trends are. I'm going to show you some of our internal data at IPA. So IPA collects a lot of projects every year and show you trends on that, and then sort of just conclude at the end of the day. So let's talk about introduction to IPA. IPA is a data-driven research company. What separates us from our peers is our proprietary and granular database. So for example, in any given year, IPA gets anywhere between 800 to 1,000 projects across all sectors. So this is upstream, midstream, chemicals, refining, infrastructure, etc. Like I said, small projects, large projects, and that gives us a continuous flow of data. The ability to have data, and data in a very structured and unstructured format, we collect data in a particular way, allows us to do research on what makes projects tick, what sort of project management practices drive success in terms of predictable costs, staying up and running, predictable schedules, competitive cost, competitive schedule. So basically, we are able to use our data to do research when it comes to asset creation. We then have most of our clients are repeat clients. We have frame agreements with over 400 clients, and I think in any given calendar year, about 100 come back to us asking us to look at large or small projects in their capital portfolio. And we present our results to them, and they verify that what we are presenting in terms of research into functioning of capital projects makes sense. And sort of the cycle repeats itself because they call us back in and we get more data. In terms of our proprietary database, as I mentioned, we have a very structured and a lot of unstructured ways of collecting data. And here's our proprietary database that we have, about 21,000 projects. And with each project, we collect anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 structured variables. And we've been doing this over 30 years. So doing this face-to-face, collecting information from project teams and organizations on the ground. So you can see that our database covers industrial projects, oil and gas projects, about 2,000 of them, mega projects. These are $2 billion class facilities or capital projects, about 600 plus, 200 plus infrastructure projects. Site and sustaining projects are projects under say $20 million on average, less than that, about 10,000. So we have a very varied database and a continuous source of data. In terms of what we do, it's all around projects and various aspects of projects. One of the projects we have, or one of the products we have, is capital project systems improvement. So we look at your portfolio as a whole, and if you are spending a lot of money every year to have high shareholder return, we kind of tell you what and where to focus in terms of getting better in terms of your capital project delivery. We look at individual project analysis. We benchmark a portfolio of small projects. So if you have a site that's running a plant, or a plant that's running and spending maybe $20 million annually, $30 million annually, you want to know how you're doing in terms of a portfolio of projects, we can come and take a look. In terms of specific areas, we've been talking about cost and how to organize cost, how to benchmark cost, how to collect costs for about 30 years. So we have a whole area that focuses on improvement of practices when it comes to the cost engineering side. We have a whole group that looks at organization and teams, digitalization, and training, etc. So a varied risk of products and services, but all focused around delivery of capital projects in order to create asset creation. So let's get into, let's call it the meat of the presentation, and start with the section of what's in the news. And to be honest, when I look at the news, everyone's talking about the transition. What strikes me is that we are in a very uncertain time. I call it up, down, and sideways. We had a time where Brent or crude was in the negative territory last year. Well, if you've looked at the prices recently, it's been over $60 over the last 3 months. It's slowing down, but there's also talk in the news about a super cycle. So oil prices are at a place where I would call makes a lot of our clients comfortable. Natural gas also has outperformed oil to date last year and is doing quite well. You can see OPEC plus. So this is OPEC plus Russia has begun to ease production cuts because they expect an increase in demand. Plus, if you go to the US, you can see that rig counts have been increasing steadily since January this year. And a lot of that is to do with the production of shale. If you look at it, the Middle East specifically, this is, again, there's been a lot of news. UAE has said that it has a huge portfolio of projects and it needs to spend a lot of money to deliver that. But you're also seeing deferred projects or slowdown in projects. So there's news that some of the projects in UAE, maybe in Qatar, are being slowed down a little bit, maybe deferred for a little bit, 6 months to a year. Contractors are facing the brunt. Petrofac is a big one in the Middle East. They're reducing staff, and I think if you look at the spending or the news with regards to Aramco, they're still spending a lot of money. but there are some delayed capital investments, especially around major, let's call it expansion and greenfield projects. So you have a mix of, we're easing production, we want to spend more money, but we are seeing in the news that things are not quite up and running, so to speak. If you look at the US, and what's happening, they are producing like never before. Individually, the US production has, I think it hit a peak of 11 million barrels, the highest last year. And everyone's talking about Tesla and the green recovery, but one needs to keep in mind that out of 280 million cars in the US, about 278 million run on oil, and the average lifespan of a vehicle is about 12 years. So the US, there's a lot of news of us changing, us transitioning, but it might not, we're not actually seeing it in the market overall. If you look at the American companies, Chevron and Exxon, there's some talk about transitioning, but if you look at the big master strategy, Exxon still plans to increase production of oil by 1 million barrels by 2025. If you go to Russia, which is also a big producer of oil, you're seeing that there's modest increases of spending, but there's tightening overall. So it's similar to sort of the Middle East. There is spending, but there's tightening overall. So once again, we have the Middle East folks saying they're going to spend a lot of money. U.S. oil production at a massive peak, shale going up. American companies not really embracing the transition, and Russia, which is also a big producer of oil, actually continuing to spend money, although a little more slowly. Then we get to Europe, where all the European companies have decided to confront the implications of climate change, and some quite drastically. I'll get to it. Within Europe, and I'm sure this is true globally, but in general, the investment market has flipped, where renewables or clean energy projects, I should say, are considered safe and boring, and oil and gas is high risk. And I think this affects companies that require cash, and I think it's going to affect the way independents function when they need cash from the market. If you look at our European clients, Total, I think they've even maybe have changed their name, but they have a renewable goal of 35 gigawatts, which is huge by 2025. BP has 50 gigawatts by 2030. So, two of the big European firms have decided that they're going all renewable. And guess what? BP plans to cut 1 million barrels of oil by 2030. So it's going sort of almost the reverse of Exxon. Shell and BP plan to slash their upstream operations by about 30 to 40%. So refineries are being gutted, staff is being, reorganized. It's not a, so transitions happening, and in some places it's fairly quick. However, you have all this news, and I'm sure you have it too, with renewable spending hitting a peak. I think there was a news in the UK the other day. But we have, for example, Norway, who's given a massive tax break over the last couple of years to balance the effect of the pandemic. So what we have actually seen is a lot of spending in, let's say, the Norwegian continental shelf because of this tax break, and it's going to continue over the next couple of years. I think you have to get projects authorized by December 2020, and if you do that, you get a nice windfall in terms of cash flow, which means that we're trying to transition over, even in Europe, into clean energy, but we are still having these local incentives or country incentives to continue spending in this space. On the other hand, European carbon credits have gotten to 40 euros per ton. This is the highest since 2005. So, and they continue to rise. So, with carbon tax going up, it makes it more viable, or it makes it more attractive to move into the clean energy space. And I think Denmark has, with Ørsted is leading the way in the offshore wind space, but they've also agreed to stop hydrocarbon production by 2050. One thing to keep in mind, for those of you who know this or you don't know this, renewables have many of the traits of what we call light industrial. They tend to be less complex, they could be more dispersed, they can be less engineering intensive, and unfortunately, the returns aren't what their oil and gas counterparts give you. So, and in the UK, we've seen that there's a whole green energy plan, and there's a shift to focus of CCUS and hydrogen, and but you also see that exploration continues in the North Sea. So, all in all, the way I think about it is that we live in uncertain times. There is transition happening. That is happening in pockets, but you're also seeing pockets of spend in sort of the traditional industries that contribute to the energy sector. So this chart is from Equinor. It's from the energy perspectives. I recommend you, for anyone who's keen to understand how macro trends are, how the futures, go and check it out. By the way, BP and Shell also publish some of them, so I'm sure they provide a much better explanation of what's happening than I can. But in a nutshell, what you should take away, that if you look at where the change is going to come when it comes to oil demand, if you take a balance scenario, they publish various scenarios. If you look at a balance scenario, which is so they say a likely scenario, most of the reduction in, say, oil by 2050 is going to come really via transportation. However, what's interesting is if you look at the change in gas demand, so that's the chart on the right, a lot of their forecasts have that there's going to be a reduction, but not that much. So gas is definitely going to be a key source in the mix. Oil has the ability to halve in about 50 years, but that still means that there's still a lot of demand for oil, even by 2050. So in any of, say, a normal energy transition, it's not like these sources of energy are going to end tomorrow, which then goes back to capital projects. You need to invest in capital projects to keep even this traditional source of hydrocarbon producing. So just to summarize, from what we see and some of what our clients see, and this is out there too. The current source of energy, they're going to be around for a while. There's a lot of infrastructure in place, and in most scenarios, they are needed as we transition over or away from hydrocarbons. Um, the pandemic has definitely accelerated the transition. I believe, if you go back to March last year, some companies had started talking about it, but targets and real change has occurred over, let's call it, the last calendar year or so. So the pandemic has made it attractive. It's made it important to move into clean energy. However, I have to say there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of this transition requires government support and legislation, and the jury is out in how much and how fast it's going to be. You're going to end up with new companies and end up going to new markets. For example, offshore wind is big in the UK, but it's huge in Asia too. So you might actually have to go to different markets to get that source of energy. You're going to have a lot of disruption in your business model, and there's going to be a lot of M&A and reorgs. What's sure, though, that going forward, you're going to end up with low complexity projects. That's definitely going to be the case. You're going to have low return on investment, and you're going to end up with a crowded marketplace. When the projects are low complexity, the barrier to entry is also low, which means you're going to end up with some new players and competing with sort of new players. And especially for the big companies, your competitive advantage might no longer be with superior project execution, but in supply chain, manufacturing, etc. So there's definitely changes coming overall in the transition. So let's talk about trends that IPA is seeing. So every year, IPA hosts two annual conferences, one for, let's call it, the midstream and the downstream sector, one especially for the oil and gas sector. And we're collecting data on an annual basis, and we publish trends, and we also publish sort of like report cards. Where does one company stack up versus the other. This is mostly for owner organizations. And I have a couple of charts from trends from within our own database. If you look at projects authorized, so this is data from our database from November 2020. So it's a bit dated, but I think it's still interesting and relevant to see. And what you can see is you have projects or the authorization year or FID on the bottom, and you kind of have an index number of projects authorized annually. And what you can see is that we had a big cycle prior to 2015, and to be honest, even through the pandemic, etc., it's been fairly stable over the last couple of years. I think we're probably going to see a bit of an uptick here in 2021, with the oil prices being quite stable since a couple of months. But in essence, there is, let's call it a stabilization of spend in the capital industry in terms of oil and gas. In terms of what kind of projects, so you still have those projects authorized here, and you have the asset cost per BOE. So how much does it cost to extract these resources when you build facilities, you build wells, and what you can see is that costs for projects have been steadily coming down. And you can see that since 2015 to now, the new projects are almost $7 to $10 cheaper than their previously authorized projects. So cost and reduction of cost and capital cost has been really a focus for a lot of our clients. What's also interesting to see is 50% have less than 150 million barrels. So what that means is that a lot of the projects that are getting authorized, at least over the last couple of years, have been, let's call it, smaller subsea tieback. So not a lot of, let's call it, huge projects or big projects. Those capital investments tend to be fewer and further between in the organizations we work for. So what have we seen over the last couple of years? The biggest focus has been cost. I think as the supply chain, you've probably felt it as the owner firms have come to you to negotiate, to work with you collaboratively on how you can drive down cost. But cost and cost focus has been sort of the biggest single-minded focus. Top management has tried to drive change. So there's a lot of change happening, and the change has really been cost focused. A lot of benchmarking has been used very early, very deep, to ensure that the scopes they create are the right scopes, and they've embraced targets from very early. So that's what sort of the best did. So the last bit is around COVID, because I know this is still affecting the supply chain. So I just wanted to show you what our data shows. So on every quarter, we've been running surveys with owner firms to collect responses on how COVID has affected the supply chain, internal operations, portfolio, and what are they doing to change. So I just have a couple of slides on this. If you want more detail, you can easily go to our website to find some. So let me show you what we're seeing. So the first thing everyone asks is what's happening as people work from home. Are they as productive? Are they not productive? What our survey respondents are telling us is that currently we are about 4% worse in terms of productivity from pre-COVID. So working from home has helped. There are enough instances or examples where people are working longer. But you end up with more meetings. It's easier to manage multiple time zones. So there are pros and cons of working from home, but the general reported sort of estimated productivity drop is about 4%. However, what's worrying is we have seen projects where teams have reported a reduction of productivity up to 30%. In fact, I just saw another project yesterday where they talked about a decrease of about 25%. So what's interesting is, it's not as bad from working in the office. It's slightly worse, but in some cases it has been quite detrimental overall. What about the supply chain? What we're seeing, if you look at, we've been taking surveys since 2020 and we're now in 2021, the supply chain disruption has actually sort of increased starting in 2021. So about 56% of our sort of projects are experiencing vendor delays. And, you can see that how much delays are experiencing. We had sort of, when the pandemic hit, if you had the baseline, you got up to 25% disruption, so 25% delays. We got better over time, but there's been a slight uptick in the surveys in March. So all this to say is the vendor supply chain has gotten disrupted. We know this. We had got a handle on it, but the curve seems to be going sort of the other way. And sort of which areas are experiencing disruption? Well, if you look at it, and it's just the bubble just show, it's no surprise the pandemic raging through Europe, and the supply chains mostly being China, Europe, and the US. But Europe is experiencing sort of the most delays that we're seeing. And this chart is just a graphical representation of how things are varying. So which countries are experiencing the most disruption? If you look at Europe, it started low and it's gotten much higher. Asia has gotten better, but the curve is reducing. And the US, surprisingly, is almost back to where it was pre-pandemic level. So different regions are experiencing different levels of disruption depending on the origin of the part. So what does that mean? So just to let you know, in terms of availability, if you look at Europe, because of the situations of quarantine, etc., the workforce availability is only about 79%, which gives you, and the productivity loss. If you look at labor on the ground and construction productivity and the environments, there's been a 14% drop in productivity. So the effective productivity in Europe is significantly reduced. So to build something now versus previously, it's 44% less effective overall. In terms of the US, like I mentioned, their workforce is almost available 100% of the time, so not as much. Their productivity has dropped a little bit since COVID, and their disruptions about 1.17. So the message is, the suppliers are experiencing delays in Europe. Doing projects in Europe is harder. There's less workforce available. Productivities have dropped, and there is definitely disruption. So let me conclude overall with my slides. So I started with the, what we're seeing in an IPAs database. I started with the macro trends. What's clear, and it's clear as day, is there is a transition that has started. It's accelerated, and it's driven by external forces, the markets, the governments, corporations realizing that change is necessary, and they've embraced them. However, at this point, what we can see is traditional hydrocarbons, especially gas, are here to stay for the medium term. And I think the jury's still out on peak oil. I know all scenarios say, oil will halve by 2050, or the balance scenario, I should say. However, that requires us changing our behavior, especially when it comes to transportation. We have gotten better. So projects have stabilized. If you look at IPAs database over time, and we have gotten better at delivering projects at low cost. But the last calendar year, I think, has been harder. We have, especially in Europe, there's lots more competition. We are having vendor supply delays. We're having labor productivity disruptions. So we've gotten good at doing projects, and now we have sort of gotten hit with another challenge, at least in the short term. And with that, I am going to conclude, and I am ready to take any questions. Thank you for listening to me.